Hi everyone, I hope you're all okay in this rather weird sort of time. Hope you're all doing okay, staying safe, staying indoors and all that. What I thought I'd do for you, because obviously I'm not seeing you very much, is put together a few little videos to explain some of the concepts I would be talking to you about in class if you were in. So I'll start by doing one on our first model of memory, which is the multi-store model of memory. As outlined by Atkinson and Shiffrin. Now, you can be really clever with this because lots of the evaluation can come from those experimental studies that we've already looked at, the ones like Baddeley and Miller, Peterson and Barrick, those ones all support this model. It's worth noticing that means you can use them as your AO3, and that means if you can evaluate those studies and say that reduces the support, obviously you can get very well developed AO3 there. So let's talk about how the multi-store model works. The multi-store model states that information first comes into the memory through the environment from an environmental stimulus. So that's the stuff going on around you, when you see stuff, when you hear stuff, etc. And that goes into the first store of the multi-store model, which is known as sensory memory. You might see that called the sensory register in some sources. Atkinson and Shiffrin weren't particularly consistent in the way they've used this, so sometimes you'll see it called sensory memory, sometimes you'll see it called the sensory register. Those are the same two things. The coding of the sensory memory is however it's coming through the environment. So if it's coming through your eyes, it'll be visual and put in what we call an iconic store, or if it's coming through your ears, it'll be auditory and put in what we call the echoic store. So what the word we use for that is modality specific. If it comes in through your fingertips, through your touch sensors, it'll go into a haptic store. Key ones to know are iconic, which is a visual coding, and echoic, which is coding based on sounds. If it's coming through your eyes, it will be coded iconically. If it comes in through your ears, it will be coded echoically. The duration is thought to be very, very short, around about half a second. And the capacity is thought to be very, very large. Think about every one of your sense cells in your eyes, every one of those light sensors in your eyes. That's adding to the capacity of your sensory memory. It's really important to notice that we're not aware of our sensory memory. Our sensory memory is held unconsciously, and so it's actually really, really difficult to study. There have been some pieces of research you might want to have read up on. I'll put a link on an email or on your Google Classrooms to some research by Sperling that supports this idea of a sensory memory. Now, the reason it's held in your unconscious is because before we can start to think about something, it needs to, according to Atkinson and Shiffrin, be paid attention to. So that's our first cognitive process here, attention. And when we pay attention to information that's in our sensory memory, it is moved over to the second store, the short-term memory. Now, this is when you can start using our previous research, because we know, as we know, the coding of short-term memory is acoustic, as shown by Baddeley. The capacity, again, I'm sure you're aware, is 7 plus or minus 2 items, as shown by Miller, cited as Jacobs, remember, in some places. And the duration is 18 to 30 seconds, Again, that's supported by Peterson and Peterson. Oh, off sheet. To get information from the short-term memory into our next store, the long-term memory, we have to rehearse it. And Atkinson and Shiffrin say this rehearsal needs to take a long time. It needs to keep happening. You need to keep repeating things over and over and over to yourself. So we're going to use the word prolonged rehearsal. Also, Atkinson and Shiffrin say to keep information in our short-term memory, to hold it there for longer than 30 seconds, we need to again rehearse that information. If we think about something, hold in our short-term memory and don't think about it again for 30 seconds, it'll be lost from your short-term memory. Happens to me all the time. For example, I'll be upstairs, think to myself, oh, I need something from downstairs, come downstairs, don't think about the thing I need for 30 seconds because I'll get distracted thinking about something else. By the time I've got downstairs, I'll be thinking to myself, now what was it I wanted again? That's an example of a piece of information that's been in my short-term memory and I haven't rehearsed it, and so it's been lost from my short-term memory. New information coming from environment goes to sensory memory then. When we pay attention to it, it goes to short-term memory. It's held in the short-term memory as long as we are rehearsing it. And if we continue to rehearse it for long enough, it'll be moved to our long-term memory where we can access it at will through a process called retrieval. So here's an example. Let's think of an environmental stimulus that it will currently be being held in your sensory memory. You're not paying attention to it yet, so it's unconscious. You're not thinking about it. You won't know this in your sensory memory until I say what it is. As soon as I say what it is, you'll start to pay attention to it. It'll move into your short-term memory and you'll be aware of the sensation of that. And the thing that I'm thinking about is the feeling of the chair that you're sitting on, or the bed that you're lying on, or however you're watching this, the feeling of the floor on your feet. Before I said it, it was in your sensory memory. Your body knew it was happening. You knew about it, but you weren't paying attention to it, and so you weren't consciously thinking about it. Now we're consciously thinking about it, we can feel the chair that we're sitting on, okay, because it's in the short-term memory, we're rehearsing it. Another nice example is the sensation of breathing. Your body's aware of the air coming into your mouth and the air leaving your mouth, but you're not paying attention to it, so it's not in your short-term memory, it's in your sensory memory. As soon as we pay attention to our breathing, it becomes much more obvious and becomes a conscious thing. It's in our short-term memory. That'll stay in your short-term memory for about 18 to 30 seconds, unless we think about it again. Okay? In about 30 seconds, you'll become unaware again of the feeling of breathing or the feeling of a chair, a feeling of sitting on a chair. That said, we all know what the feeling of sitting on a chair feels like. So we don't actually have to be sitting on a chair to understand, to be thinking about that, because it's in our long-term memory. We've all sat on chairs enough that that memory's been formed in our long-term memory. So even when we're not sitting on a chair, we can think about what it's like to sit on a chair in our short-term memory, because we can retrieve that information from our long-term memory. Just to clarify then, long-term memory coding is semantic, as shown by Baddeley. Capacity is limitless, and duration is a lifetime, as shown by Barrick with his nice little study of yearbooks. Remember, really good ecological validity there, perhaps some issues of internal validity with Barrick. So what we can do is we can say Barrick supports this idea that long-term memory's duration is a lifetime, using his findings on yearbooks showing that people could remember their yearbooks, or people from their yearbooks, much, much later in life. We might then say this is particularly good support because it has good ecological validity. It's real information that therefore we can generalize the results of this to real life, really clearly showing that long-term memory does have the duration of a lifetime, even in real life providing strong support for the multi-store model. And if we're working like that, remember, always at the end of your double burger point, link back to what it means for the multi-store model. I just want to put a few notes on here. You might see this sometimes called elaborative rehearsal. It's really important to notice that in the original multi-store model, Atkinson and Shiffrin said that to get information from short-term memory to long-term memory, all you had to do was keep rehearsing it, keep saying it to yourself. Some updated models replace prolonged rehearsal with elaborative rehearsal. This was a suggestion made by Craik, who said that actually to get information from our short-term memory to our long-term memory, we have to do more than just repeat it to ourselves. We have to link it to information that's already in our long-term memory. And he called that elaborative rehearsal. I would use that as AO3, as an evaluation point. Therefore, I would always say in our description of my multi-store model, to get information from short-term memory to long-term memory, that's prolonged rehearsal just there, rather than elaborative rehearsal. And I'd use the idea of elaborative rehearsal as AO3. What I'd like you to think about going forwards is to have a look at this research by Sperling and find out what he finds about sensory memory. There's also a lovely piece of research called the primacy and recency effect. By some psychologists called Glanzer and, be careful how you say it, Kunitz. And two other pieces of research on this are some case studies. HM, which supports the model, and KF, which criticises the model. What it will be useful for you to do is have a bit of research on Sperling, find out what he did, have a look at the primacy and recency effects by Glanzer and Kunitz, read about HM and KF, and try and think about how HM demonstrates that this model is correct, and think about how KF actually suggests that there are problems with particularly this idea of the short-term memory. Okay, I hope you are all getting on okay. Hope you've enjoyed that. Hope you found it useful. Any questions, please do feel free to drop me an email. Thanks.